Cheers, and welcome to our fireside chat on the Voluntary Virtues Network. Today we have a special guest on our show, Dr. Brian Harward, social psychologist. And then I also have John and Pat. We're going to be discussing the psychology of freedom today. First of all, though, the beer I'm drinking is Chronic by Pizza Port. It's an amber ale, pretty good. I'm more of a fan of IPAs, so this isn't quite as hoppy as I like, but it's still really good. Anybody else drinking something?
I'm drinking Hoegaarden. Probably know what that is. If you don't, try it. It's really good. That's my analysis of it.
My fermented product of choice for the evening is kombucha, gingerberry from Synergy.
Nice. So, Brian, is freedom psychologically beneficial, do you think?
I can't imagine disagreeing with that. I think it absolutely is, and always or almost always. I'm not sure that everyone in mainstream psychology would say that, because I interact with them and somehow they find a way to support violence and statism and things. But speaking for myself, I'm unable to see it any other way. Even when you consider different schools of psychology, still it tends to fit. Humanistic psychology fits perfectly in. Sort of self-determination is a key for happiness, and just being given the opportunity to flourish, which means not being held back by, say, the rules or by force from others.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to focus more on poor childhood events, which a lot of people do, it's a bit of an older school thing, but guess what? Good parenting practices don't create a lot of those problems. Giving your children freedom, it's not just that simple, but certainly avoids a lot of the problems. And just to throw out one more, Gestalt thinking acknowledges that, someone's subjective reality sort of can be accepted as fact. To say, well, however you experience it, we accept that you experienced it that way, and we have no desire to force you into another way of thinking about it. And that's, again, very accepting, very free, and that's considered healthy, or at least beneficial in that mindset. So to me, across the board, it would be wonderful for people's health to have more freedom without really any limitation. In other words, I think the more freedom, the better people would do. And we know that people are just happier when they are not bound by the rules of others. Free to be themselves, free to make their own decisions. I think most people acknowledge that, but then at some point retract and say, well, but we can't have total freedom because of, the typical objections, that we might not have enough order or rules. But I would say,
so often they
from the individual level, it's always good.
Yeah.
From a societal level, I see the argument for saying it's not always good, although I think it is. Yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that a lot of times they'll talk in levels of freedom. Well, how much freedom is too much freedom, and that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, there's many aspects of it. It's like philosophically, economically, you could essentially be enslaved by your ego, or time, or money, or other factors that could, effectively shackle you, or shackle your mind psychologically. And it's interesting to see. Personally, the journey and how you could, me personally, maybe have, as my understanding of freedom grows and it spills over in other concepts or other aspects like I just mentioned, it has an effect on my personal well-being, right? So, yeah, it's a pretty broad subject.
Do you need to go?
I may have to run.
We had a minor collision.
Yep. Anyway, So
To continue what we were saying, I think another objection is that people just have a lot of fear-driven problems,
Right,
which is a
right.
theme we talk about a lot.
absolutely
And so they
makes sense.
they see sort of the benefit in a basic way, but then say, oh, but what will really happen?
Right, exactly.
Can we
Very
truly
well
do
said.
this?
Right.
There's a fear of the negatives that will accompany it. Not always misguided either. I mean, if you had a 3-year-old and you gave them total freedom, well, I see the problems. But with adults, I don't see an end to the benefits really, and it seems like the negatives are easy to overcome.
Yeah, one thing I've really learned over my reading and delving into the various aspects of freedom is that it's not just a political philosophy. It really has to be a whole worldview, really. Before you to be really actually free mentally. Because statism has permeated pretty much, or the ideas of authoritarian memes have permeated pretty much our entire lives. We can't buy clothes that aren't regulated by the government. We can't drink water that's not pumped by the government. In a lot of places, it's even illegal to collect rainwater because the government holds claim over it. And even in parenting, I know you're a little bit into the peaceful parenting type stuff. Even in how we raise our kids can be very controlling. Even the way we talk to people, even our language tends towards this idea of authority over us, which I think all plays into our mental slavery, in essence. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think once it's in the culture, you sort of inherit it as normal. And even worse, you usually end up participating in it before you understand what you're doing.
Right.
And once you've participated in it, it's even harder to break free. And because you'd have to accept that you've made a mistake or that things you've done in the past were not good. And, by the time most people are adolescents, they've aggressed against others in a number of ways, often because they were told to, essentially, or told to be the obedient one, in an unreasonable situation. And something in our mind says, I don't want to think I live in a world that's crazy, chaotic, or wrong, or the things that I've done are wrong. So having done that sort of undermines your ability to see maybe that it's wrong to limit another person's freedom, or that you have a right to retain your own freedom. Because most people that I know have participated in that on both ends of the spectrum, controlling others, being controlled, and accepted as normal. And have even been told a list of reasons of why it's good. Maintaining order, maintaining peace. We'll have chaos if everyone doesn't follow the rules. There's no evidence for that, necessarily. I guess we haven't really tried it. There's no evidence against it either. But they believe it because it's the common belief. And that justifies doing it. And the more you do it, the more you
it's a fearful idea.
Yeah.
If people aren't controlled, then they'll just go wild and start killing people and raping dogs, and cats and dogs will be living together.
Yeah, there is that sort of fear, even though an individual would tell you they wouldn't do those things even if given the choice.
Yeah.
But they feel like everyone else will do it. Or maybe they even fear that they would, but I don't think usually.
Now the one semi psychological argument that I get often is that, well, we're evolutionarily a pack type social creature, and there are these natural leaders or alpha males who will naturally rise to the top to control everyone else, and that's just the natural order of things, and so we shouldn't fight statism because it's just natural.
I would agree totally. It's a built-in thing that we do very naturally, but that doesn't make it any less terrible. We are naturally built to do pretty awful things. We have aggression as one of our primary instincts. It's not that it's unnatural, it's that it's bad, it's wrong. So sure, yeah, I agree with them that it's hardwired into us to some extent to repeatedly make those mistakes. That doesn't make them, correct things rather than mistakes.
I'm going to aggressively interrupt this
And having a
discussion.
evolutionarily speaking, you can have a leader without necessarily having authority built into that. There will likely always be those who are more inclined to lead, be the first one in to embrace new technologies, new ideas, the first ones to take a hold of new ideas, or basically just lead the way in certain aspects. And there will always be those who are more inclined to not blaze trails, for instance. So you can have leadership without having to have someone in blue with a badge and a gun on the belt. Yeah.
But would you say then that statism is inevitable because of this?
No, I think we can get past it evolutionarily speaking. I think we can evolve past the need for the state to manage those complex social issues. We can. I believe that we can find a way to manage water, air, property, crime,
Roads.
Of course, the roads voluntarily. But yeah, I think that is the great work. The noble endeavor is engaging in these conversations and trying to blaze a path forward, the voluntary path.
Patrick, I don't know if you exactly know what we're talking about. Basically,
I'm a little
we're
lost, but
discussing.
I'm finding my footing.
We're discussing right now. It's the existence of natural leaders amongst the species makes statism inevitable.
I have to say I agree with that, but you were talking about overcoming that evolutionarily speaking, and I don't know, my view of it is maybe too simplistic in that I just think that it's like another step along the way for us. Obviously some species evolve when challenged and some don't,
Right.
So I just look at it on that simplistic level, like it's evolve from it or perish,
Right.
So everything we were capable of doing because of it advanced the species, for better or for worse. The question is, what do you do with it now? I don't know.
Yeah, I've said it before. I really think that it's a race to either move past statism or go extinct as a species. Like, which one will happen first?
Right.
I tend towards optimism. I think we will have freedom, a worldwide freedom at some point in history. But there's always that chance that that the state kills off humanity, I think.
Yeah, Stefan Molyneux has that saying, basically, this is 6,000 years of scar tissue on the mind, that we have this compulsion to organize the way we do, from the statist perspective.
But all we need is an example to further the evolution. And just to clarify, we're talking a social evolution, really.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But if you think about it, the path we've already followed, even though we get down on statism in general, it has been a positive progression throughout the history of leadership, so to
Absolutely.
speak.
Overall, I think.
Less deaths, more freedom,
The Greek states, the Roman states, the Magna Carta.
From monarchy to democracy, or republics, whatever. It was an improvement in prosperity and freedom. not total freedom, but it is more. There was more respect for the individual. And I think what really happened, if you look back at it just in the most simplistic terms, is someone proved it worked first and everyone copied. And so that's what we need now. And people ask me all the time, they think it's crazy, especially to be well educated and all this. They say, how are you an anarchist? Do you want to overthrow the government? No, I want the people to want to not to have a government, to realize that we don't want it anymore. Right. And then I want there to not be one. I don't want to force it on anyone, to force the removal of it on anyone. That would be the opposite of what we want. But I think if we can show it's another increase, another level of prosperity and quality of life, like every other major change we've made has been, people will figure it out. And I think it's the natural progression. I don't even think, we should feel too bad about that we've been through what we've been through, because, we are primitive in our thinking sometimes. We have a lot of instincts. People do a lot of dangerous things. I think, it took some time to realize there were definitely people saying at one point in time, the masses could never govern themselves. They're too stupid. Well, we've proved people can. It's not going great all the time, but they can, right? And we're now saying we don't need anyone to govern us. And people say that'll never work. People aren't smart enough or nice enough or thoughtful enough to do that. Well, they can be. They can be, especially if they see the benefit. I think it's where we're headed. Hopefully. I'm not as optimistic as you, but I think it will happen. I wouldn't guess in our lifetimes, but I hope.
There's a few experiments that stand out in terms of authority. The Milgram experiments, most notably. What can you say about those?
Well, they're a great example of the sort of the mantra of tyranny. I'm just following orders, right? They're a great demonstration of that. In the
Why don't you explain what they were first?
Yeah. So in the Milgram study, people were brought in as participants, and they were fooled to some extent about what was going on. They were told that they were controlling a machine that would deliver electric shocks to a person in an adjacent room, a person who they couldn't see. And that person was attempting to learn something. And
word pairs.
What?
Word pairs.
Yeah, it was like a word task. And when they answered wrong, they were supposed to receive a shock. And so the people participating in the study were told, hey, the idea here is to see if we can improve learning by giving a shock when people get something wrong. The truth of the study was that the learner, as they called it, the person potentially being shocked and answering questions, was a friend of the researcher and an actor, and not actually a participant in the study, but a part of the research team. And another researcher would be there, usually in a white lab coat or something like that, somehow looking official, and would also tell them, that they need to carry out the study. And what would happen is, as it progressed, the shocks get stronger and stronger. The machine was even labeled with double or triple X. I think triple X. Yeah, triple X on the last one. And somewhere along the line, towards the highest level of shock, it said like danger or something. And what happened was they basically wanted to see how far would people go, how much shock would they administer, even the one at the end that maybe could be hurting or killing someone. And as part of this, it's important to say the actor who was supposedly receiving the shocks would scream out in pain in the medium levels of shocks and high levels of shocks, and even complain of things like that it was causing them trouble with their heart, and begging for the study to stop. Things like this would happen. I'm not sure if begging for the study to stop was in the original version, but definitely crying out in pain and even complaining about ailments. And the idea was at first, well, people would do this to a point, but they're not sadists, so they'll stop at some point. They wouldn't torture another person. The actual results were the vast majority of people were willing to push the highest level of shock. And the end result and interpretation was that they did so because they felt they weren't making the choice, that the experimenter and the situation was what it was, and they were simply playing a role. And so it wasn't a personal, ethical, or moral question of pressing the button. It was just following orders. So they thought, well, the experimenter was taking responsibility for it, even though I'm pressing the button to hurt someone. And they consider that obedience research because they really think the key was that the people did it because they were ordered to. And a lot of people protested. They would say, no, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't hurt somebody like this. And the researcher would just say, no, please continue. And they would ensure them that they were taking responsibility for it, just like someone's boss would, or someone's superior in the military would, saying, no, you're just following orders, just do what I'm saying. And so most people did. Did I cover it okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Oh, wasn't there a point where they brought in multiple people? And if one person refused to do it, then the rest of the group would refuse as well?
Not in
Something
the
like
original version. I don't know if they did that in this study, to be honest. I'd have to check again. But yeah, in some studies, when one person does object,
And more people do. Yeah.
everyone realizing that's what's right will jump ship. So you sort of need that one hero. If you're interested in that type of research at all, look up Philip Zimbardo. He likes to talk a lot about the nature of evil, and I don't know anyone better to talk about it than him, about not only why we're evil, but in what situations you can change that and be what he calls a hero, which usually involves just not doing something terrible. I don't believe he's politically aligned with us, but his explanation of these things and his research is amazing. So look him up, Philip Zimbardo, if you want to learn more about evil and why people are evil. and he's very optimistic, actually, so he talks about how to avoid it as well.
There's another one, The Wave, too. High school, 1968, I believe it is. High school civics teacher. Did an experiment on his whole class, essentially, and it didn't go well, in the sense that it didn't basically the students went down the path that would show that a Holocaust scenario could happen here in the United States again as late as 1968. So yeah.
That was one of the big inspirations for the Milgram study, was to see if people would follow orders like that elsewhere outside of Nazi Germany, and yeah, they will. Just about any culture.
Are you familiar with Marshall Rosenberg at all?
Yeah.
He wrote the book Nonviolent Communication, and did meetings on it and stuff like that. He said that one of the things I heard him talking about was during the trials on the Nazis after World War II, that somebody asked, was it Heinrich Himmler? Himmler asked him if it was difficult for him to send all these Jews to their death. And he said, no, it was really easy because of our language. And I forget what he called the language. It's some German word.
Amtssprache.
That's it. Amtssprache. And basically it was a way of deferring responsibility. The whole I'm just following orders type scenario like you got in the Milgram experiment. And so, like I was saying before, I really think you have to change your language, how you're talking, to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, because saying I'm just following orders successfully for a person, at least psychologically speaking, takes away that process of is this or is this not moral.
Right.
They stop asking that question and say, well, that's not, doesn't matter, I'm following orders. And if it was more about them somehow, they would stop. We know that.
Yeah, the Nuremberg trials proved, at least in a legal sense here in the United States, that it set the precedent that following orders is not just. It's not an excuse to commit heinous crimes. You can't commit heinous crimes and say, hey, I was following orders, but then you kind of look today and it's like that's almost the culture we see in the emerging police state. It's like we've forgotten all about the Nuremberg trials, Anyway.
I've never seen it more than in becoming a parent and how I talk to my kids, because I'm consistently having to check myself for going into like the old paradigm
Absolutely
of
right,
control, power, authority, threats. I mean, the threats of violence, like that
Right.
was, I think my dad, who raised me, he was like the first generation of his family to successfully only use the threat of violence and never actually have to take it to violence. But I mean, that was still pretty effective in conditioning me.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
yeah, I'm definitely, I don't know, I'm new to a lot of these ideas, and I feel like boxer on the way to the glue factory a little bit, like snapped up. Wait a minute. I thought I was going to a party. This isn't a party. Oh. Yeah, and those Milgram experiments, when I learned of those, I was like, crap, I'm in that large percentage of people that just follows orders and follows the rules. And I don't know, knowing that about myself makes me see what I don't want to impart to my children. And
Yeah.
I don't know, that's why I think you're right. It'll take a while, but it is possible to have this free
I concur.
state.
To go back to Marshall Rosenberg, along that same lines, I heard him telling a story about when he was raising his own son. At one point, he had asked him like to pick up his jacket or something, and his son said, "Who was your slave before I was born?" He said it just hit home for him.
That's funny.
Exactly what
Wow.
he was doing. That the language he was using was sounding like a command rather than
Yeah.
a request.
Kids say the darndest things.
Yeah. So anyways, another study, the Stanford prison study. My understanding, it wasn't even finished
No,
because of...
that was Philip Zimbardo. He ran that study. And it was called off early because it got so out of control so quickly. Interestingly, Dr. Zimbardo himself didn't realize it because he was playing warden. He got so wrapped up in it, his research assistant had to actually convince him to stop it, because he had also, being such a smart guy, running the study on purpose, still got caught up in it to where he didn't realize it needed to be stopped. She convinced him to stop it, so they did. I believe it was just 4 days in.
Yeah, right.
And it was planned to go quite a bit longer. But things got so out of control. There, they set up a mock prison. And people who participated all knew they were going to be put in this sort of setting. They agreed to be in a similar setting, but they came in either to be guards or prisoners. The prisoners were actually arrested, realistically, like at home or wherever. But they knew still that it was fake because they were told they were going to participate in this experiment.
Mm-hmm.
But they were often still humiliated, being handcuffed on their street or something like that in front of the neighbors. And then within that, what happened, just to shorten things, is very quickly the guards became extremely abusive, and the prisoners became very difficult in trying to, understandably, go against what the guards were doing hunger strikes and things like that, and it got abusive really, really quick. That's not what they expected. They might have expected that behavior, sort of, but at least one person had a mental breakdown, as they call it, just completely lost it. And he knew it was fake. Everyone knew it was fake. No one was being fooled here. It just felt so real. They even invented their own beliefs about what was going on. They were all free to leave, but somehow the prisoners, like a rumor started, and they believed they weren't really free to leave. Things like that happened. And the things the prisoners were subjected to was the most shocking. They were degraded, like physically, made to do humiliating things, as well as just abused, physically. And so it was another one of those sort of scary look into human nature sort of studies.
I remember taking away from that, tying it into slavery, that even some of the students involved in the experiment get aggressive towards their fellow experimenters, or the inmate experimenters, because they took it. The ones who were speaking out were were
Chastised.
chastised basically. And they find out in slavery, in antebellum slavery too, that they were stealing away the labor pool basically, and that anyway.
Yeah, and unfortunately we weren't able to get to robot sex again this week, but
Sorry about that. I didn't see that time, but
yep, time's up. Have a good evening.
take care.
Right.